The moment I leaned back in that old wooden chair inside the lodge on top of the hill, I smiled and told my friends, in just one day, I wiped out 127 violations from the HOA. Not with a lawsuit, not with the cops, just with water. Right then, everyone's eyes went wide, like I'd just confessed to some earth-shattering secret. I knew it sounded hard to believe. A whole community with 100 vacation cabins, people who thought they'd already won with the law, with their money, with the power of a smug HOA president. And yet, it all crumbled in a single day. Or more exactly, with one spin of the iron will inside the dam my great-grandfather built more than a century ago. But before I get into the details, let me set the scene for you. This is the eastern United States, at the foothills of the Appalachians. Rolling hills that glow deep green in summer and blaze with red and orange in the fall. Early mornings are damp, with the smell of wet leaves and the sound of woodpeckers echoing in the distance. And down in a narrow valley lies a wide, endless lake everyone calls Hargrove Lake. That lake isn't a natural gift. It's a legacy my family created and guarded for 4 generations. I remember my dad standing by the shore, pointing at the shimmering water, saying, "Son, in this life, most things we think we own are only borrowed. But this lake is different. It belongs to us, because every stone in that dam was laid by your great-grandfather's hands." When I heard that, my chest tightened. I understood that keeping the lake wasn't just a duty. It was a mission. And yet, decades later, a group of people in expensive suits, driving shiny SUVs, thought they could turn the lake into a community amenity. A selling point for cabins. A way to jack up property values. A way to make themselves richer. They looked at the water and saw a pretty picture for a glossy brochure. Me? I looked at it like it was part of me. And when they tried to take it, I had no choice but to remind them this lake still knows how to speak. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of the future. I knew I'd be the villain to some, but I'd also be the only one standing to protect the legacy. That's when it hit me. This isn't just a story about an arrogant HOA. It's a story about boundaries. The line between greed and justice. Between forged papers and the truth. Between people and nature. Before Catherine Doyle and the HOA showed up with fake maps and legal threats, my story had already started a long time ago. It began with a man my whole family speaks of with respect, my great-grandfather, William Hargrove. Back in the 1920s, when the Appalachia region was poor and the land dry and rocky, William saw something no one else could. One afternoon, standing on a cliff looking down at the valley, he turned to his wife and said, "Do you see it? 3 streams meet right here. If we block them, the water will form a lake." When my great-grandmother later told the story, she said she shivered the moment she heard those words. She knew William was talking about something that would change the future of the family. He wasn't a wealthy investor. He was just a road engineer, a man who knew dirt, stone, numbers, and drawings. But with his calloused hands, his sharp mind, and the help of a few dozen men from the village, he built the first dam. It wasn't some massive wall of concrete like Hoover Dam. It was a solid rock dam, over 20 feet high, strong enough to stop the streams and turn the valley into a shimmering lake. Soon after, he built a small lodge from wood and stone on the cliff overlooking the lake. That lodge, even now, is where I live. Every morning, when I open the door and step onto the porch, I take a deep breath of misty air mixed with the scent of pine. And in that moment, I feel like I'm living inside the same painting my great-grandfather once sketched with sweat and hard work. The next generation, my grandfather kept caring for the lake. He didn't change much, just added a few trails around the shore so the family could walk. My dad was different. He loved nature so much that he once taught me, "Don't ever think this lake is just for looking at. It's alive. It breathes through the streams. It stays healthy because of the trees along its banks." I still remember that summer afternoon when the 2 of us were fishing on a wooden boat. He held his rod, turned to me, and said, "Son, when I'm gone, this lake will be the real test for you. Will you protect it, or let it be taken away?" The moment I heard it, my heart pounded and my throat tightened, because I realized he was placing in my hands a legacy heavier than anything else. Time passed. My family kept paying the taxes, maintaining the dam, quietly guarding the lake. This whole place felt like its own world, peaceful, still, where birds sang at sunrise and thick fog rested on the water in winter mornings. That's why I chose to keep living here, even while the outside world kept changing every single day. And in that moment, remembering everything my great-grandfather and father had said, I knew I wasn't just a landowner. I was a guardian. And the lake was the heart of the Hargrove family. Right after the real estate boom in the early 2000s, the land around Hargrove Lake, once written off as worthless, suddenly turned into a gold mine for investors. New asphalt roads cut through the hills. Billboards popped up along the highway, Lakeview Pines luxury lakeside community. Among all the newcomers, one person stood out the most: Catherine Doyle. She was in her 50s, always rolling in with a shiny white SUV, dressed head to toe in designer activewear, though I doubt she'd ever broken a sweat in her life. The moment she stepped out of the car, you could feel it, that air of someone who believed she was born to give orders. One morning, I stopped by the little grocery store in town and overheard Catherine talking to a group of new residents. With a sweet but icy tone, she smiled and said, "The truth is, this lake is the greatest asset our community has. Without it, Lakeview Pines would be nothing more than an ordinary suburb." The second I heard that, my heart slammed in my chest. She didn't mention the Hargrove name. She didn't mention the near century of sweat my family poured into protecting it. At first, Catherine came in soft. The HOA newsletters showed up in every mailbox, bold letters printed on the front. A friendly reminder to enjoy the beauty of our community lake responsibly. Right then, I crushed that paper in my hand, knuckles white. Just one sentence was enough to turn my family's legacy into a decoration for them. A few weeks later, I got an email from Catherine herself. It read, "The HOA board has determined that your private dock has deteriorated and no longer meets the community's aesthetic standards. Please refer to the approved color palette attached." I laughed, then calmly typed back, "Mrs. Doyle, the HOA's authority ends at the boundary marker. My dock is private property, and the color it's painted is my business." The moment I hit send, a chill ran down my spine. Because I knew to people like Catherine, one refusal is a direct challenge. And sure enough, from that moment on, the hidden war had begun. Catherine didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as an obstacle that needed to be removed. In her eyes, I was just a middle-aged man with messy hair, living in a weathered stone lodge on the hill. But she forgot one thing. I didn't just inherit that lodge. I inherited the deeper power of the lake below. After Catherine's smug little reminder, I thought I'd seen all her tricks. But I was wrong. That was only the beginning. One afternoon in March, I got the HOA newsletter along with a colorful map, introduced as Lakeview Pines' 10-year community plan. I unfolded it, and my eyes narrowed right away. Staring back at me was a drawing of a man-made beach, a fishing pier, a kayak dock, all placed on the very land my family had guarded for 100 years. The second I realized what I was looking at, my heart nearly stopped. I rushed out onto the lodge porch and looked down at the lake. The grassy shore where I'd played as a kid, the old oak grove where my dad used to set up his folding chair to read, all of it was shaded in pale blue, stamped with the label community amenities. I didn't waste time. I drove straight to the county office to check for myself. The old clerk pulled a fresh file from the drawer, dropped it on the counter, and said it had just been filed a few weeks earlier. I flipped through the pages and froze. A brand new survey map, with a seal and a surveyor's signature, showing my property line shifted by several hundred feet. With just a few strokes of a pen, they had swallowed up more than 40 acres of lakeside land. Right after that, I called my lawyer, Frank Miller, an older guy with silver hair from the next town over. He listened, then sighed. They hired the wrong man. This surveyor had his license revoked 2 years ago for fraud. This map's a fake, no doubt about it. The moment I heard that, the anger inside me exploded. I spent the whole weekend walking the property lines with a handheld GPS and my great-grandfather William's original records. Every iron marker I dug up from under the leaves proved what I already knew. This land belonged to the Hargroves, not Lakeview Pines. I pulled all the evidence together into a thick report and sent it straight to Catherine and the entire HOA board. Naively, I thought once they saw proof, they'd back off. But they didn't. At the very next HOA meeting, Catherine held up my report, shook her head, gave a little smirk, and told the residents, This is nothing but harassment from an outsider. We can't let ourselves be threatened by someone who refuses to fit in. I sat in the corner of that room, fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my skin, chest tight with rage. It wasn't just me they dismissed. It was the truth itself, bent and twisted in front of dozens of people. And right then, I knew one thing. Catherine wasn't going to stop. She believed that with fake papers, she could turn my family's lake into a prop for her community. And I knew it wouldn't be long before they started digging. Right after Catherine brushed off all the evidence I'd given her, I knew this wouldn't end with fake maps. And sure enough, a few weeks later, the first sounds started echoing through the valley. Under the banner of building the future of Lakeview Pines, the HOA officially broke ground on what they called the Timberline Cabins project. That Monday morning, I stood on the lodge porch, coffee cup shaking in my hand, and watched a line of trucks roll down toward the lake. Bulldozers growled, chainsaws ripped through the air, and the stench of diesel tore apart the peace this place once held. My heart pounded as I saw the old oak trees crash to the ground one after another. The very trees that had shaded my dad while he fished now lay splintered, chopped into pieces, and hauled away on trucks. Heat rose in my chest, flushing my face, and my hands shook so hard coffee sloshed over the rim of my cup. One afternoon, while walking the property line, I stumbled upon the Patterson family, a young couple in their early 30s with a little blonde-haired daughter. They stood on the foundation of a cabin under construction, eyes glowing with hope. The husband turned to me with a big smile and said, "Can you believe it? We've dreamed our whole lives of having a lake house. This'll be our daughter's very first summer vacation here." Hearing that, my chest tightened. I didn't blame them. They were innocent buyers, swept up in the dream Catherine had sold. But I knew the truth. That cabin wasn't built on safe ground. It sat right where my great-grandfather's journal marked the lake would rise when nature reclaimed its level. Over the next few weeks, the project grew like mushrooms after rain. Prefab wooden cabins dropped onto concrete pads, porches facing the water, yellow porch lights blinking at dusk, glass doors reflecting the sunset. From across the lake, it felt like they were mocking me. And Catherine? She showed up nearly every day, driving her white SUV straight to the site, hopping onto a golf cart with sunglasses on, waving her hand like a queen commanding troops. Sometimes, she'd even drive up near my lodge, park at the edge of the site, tilt her chin up at me, and smile that cold smile. No words, just a look that said, "See? I'm winning." In that moment, my body shook and a chill ran down my spine. But instead of letting fear take over, I swallowed hard, forced myself to stay calm, and thought, "Go ahead, Catherine. Build more. Because one day, nature will answer." Day by day, the lakeshore I knew became a roaring construction zone. The birds thinned out, the water turned murky, and cabins crowded together, 127 in total. From a distance, the shoreline looked like an ugly scar carved into the land. And right then I realized, this fight wasn't about paperwork or arguments anymore. This was a full-on invasion, a declaration of war on my family's legacy. And I knew it was time to look to the past to find a way forward. After watching 127 cabins sprout up along the lake like mushrooms, I walked back into the lodge with my mind in knots. I knew I couldn't beat Catherine through HOA meetings or endless legal letters. I needed something stronger, deeper, a truth no forged map or smug smile could erase. Up in the dusty attic, where my family had stored records for generations, I dug through old wooden boxes. The air smelled of yellowed paper and damp wood, pulling me back to my great-grandfather William's time. Then I found it, a thick, leather-bound book, edges frayed, the words on the cover still clear. Journal of William Hargrove, 1927. The moment I flipped the first page, my chest tightened, throat dry. In black ink, he had written down every measurement, every calculation from when he built the dam. And then, halfway through, I found a note that seared itself into my mind. The natural water level of the valley stands at 1,845 feet above sea level. For safety, we maintain the lake at 1,839 feet. The dam can withstand this difference. Right then, I shook with both fear and excitement. This was the key. That 6-foot gap meant every cabin along the shore, even the Pattersons' brand new place, was sitting inside the natural lake bed. They hadn't built on solid ground. They'd built straight into the path of water. I dropped into a wooden chair, hands trembling so hard the journal almost slipped from my lap. My heart pounded, my head spun. Part of me was terrified of the power I suddenly held, terrified of the thought of drowning $1 million project. But another part burned bright. This was the truth, and it was the weapon my great-grandfather had left me. I carried the journal and the engineering drawing straight to Frank Miller's office. He flipped through the pages, pushed his glasses up, then looked at me hard. Do you realize what this means? If you let the lake rise back to its natural level, their entire project is underwater. You're within your rights. I sucked in a long breath, my chest aching like my lungs would burst. Guilt welled up. Frank, should I even do this? I don't want to turn into some kind of destroyer. He set a steady hand on my shoulder, voice low but firm. This isn't destruction. It's restoration. You're not pushing water into their homes. They built their homes into your lake. On the drive back, I pulled over at the shore, watching the sunset bleed red and orange across the water. My chest clenched, not from pain, but from the weight of truth. William Hargrove's legacy had handed me a hard choice, but also the only path to protect my family and this land. And in that moment, I decided, if Catherine chose to challenge nature, then nature would answer for me. That morning, the Appalachia sky was heavy and gray, low clouds hugging the ridges. A thin veil of fog drifted over the lake, making everything look like a dream. I stood outside the lodge, thermos of coffee in my hand, heart beating faster than usual. Today was the day I carried out the decision that had kept me awake all week. At exactly 9 o'clock, I drove down to the dam. Inside the cold concrete tunnel, the smell of mildew and rust hit me hard. I placed my hand on the massive iron wheel, the valve that controlled the water flow. My hand shook, my palm slick with sweat. I swallowed, pushed down the fear, and whispered to myself, this isn't destruction. This is justice. I started to turn the wheel. Instantly, a deep rumble echoed through the tunnel, metal grinding on metal. The vibration ran from my hands all the way down to my boots. The valve slowly tightened, cutting the outflow downstream. The water began to rise. I ran up to the top of the dam, raised my binoculars, and looked toward the shoreline cabins. At first, nothing had changed. Fresh wooden cabins gleamed in the morning light. Brand new Adirondack chairs sat neatly on porches. American flags fluttered in the breeze. But within an hour, I saw the water touch the edge of the manicured lawns. When the workers came back from lunch, one man in a hard hat stood at the waterline, pointed, and shouted, "Hey, you guys see this? The water's higher." Others gathered, murmuring. They thought it was some natural fluctuation. But I knew this was only the beginning. By early afternoon, the water lapped at the concrete pads of the lowest row of cabins. Through the binoculars, I saw a young father holding his little girl on the steps, confusion on his face. His wife tugged at his arm, voice trembling. "Jim, why's the water rising so fast? Is this normal?" My throat closed up. They weren't to blame. They had only believed Catherine's empty promises. Around 3 o'clock, Catherine arrived. Her shiny white SUV screeched to a stop at the side entrance. She stepped out, sandals sinking into wet soil. Pulling off her sunglasses, her eyes flashed with anger. She stormed to the water's edge, pointing and yelling at the workers, "Stop everything and pump the water out. This is just temporary." I couldn't hear her words from where I stood, but I didn't need to. Her panicked, stubborn gestures said it all. My chest tightened, not from satisfaction, but from watching a false empire crack before my eyes. By 4, the water had swallowed half the porches of the first row of cabins. Wooden furniture bobbed on the surface. String lights flickered, then went out. I watched Catherine bark into her phone, waving her arm as if she could order the lake itself to retreat. But nature doesn't take orders. Quietly, slowly, relentlessly, it devoured every board, every brick. By 6, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the water had claimed 4 full rows of cabins. Workers scrambled to load supplies onto trucks. Others simply fled. The Patterson family rushed out too, clutching bags, carrying their daughter to the car. Just before they pulled away, the wife looked back at their brand new cabin, now flooded up to the windows, her eyes wet with tears. In that instant, my heart slammed against my ribs, yet my mind felt strangely blank. I felt victory, but also a crushing weight pressing down on me. I knew I'd chosen a path I could never turn back from. As night fell, I stayed on top of the dam, watching headlights stream away from the site. Below me, the rising lake shimmered under the moon, reflecting the cabins sinking deeper into the water. There was no roar of disaster, only the steady murmur of water, a calm sound, but powerful enough to shatter every illusion. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't some freak flood. This was a cleansing. And nature, on my behalf, had just answered Catherine Doyle. The very next morning, I heard sirens rolling up from the valley. A black and white cruiser pulled into the entrance of the Timberline Cabins site. Catherine, in a light-colored coat with her face stiff as stone, rushed to meet the deputy. I stood on the lodge porch, binoculars in hand, watching every move. The second she spotted the man in uniform step out of the car, Catherine lunged forward, her voice shrill. "You have to arrest him right now. He deliberately destroyed our property. He drowned my cabins." A chill shot down my spine. But I steadied myself, walked down the lodge steps, and drove to the dam with the file I'd prepared. As soon as I arrived, Catherine spun around, pointed straight at me, and shouted, "That's him. Put him in cuffs." The deputy, young, worn-out looking, turned to me and said slowly, "Mr. Hargrove, Mrs. Doyle accuses you of flooding and property damage. Do you have anything to say?" Right then, I popped open my trunk and pulled out my great-grandfather William's old journal, the original survey maps, and the stamped file from Frank Miller. Handing them over, I said calmly, "Sir, I only did one thing. I returned the lake to its natural level, exactly as my family's legal rights from 1927 allow. Every single one of those cabins sits in the recorded flood zone." He flipped through the documents, his eyes shifting as he skimmed. Then he looked at the lake, at the cabins sinking in the water, and finally at Catherine, her face red, her hands trembling with rage. At last, he nodded and said, "This is a civil dispute. There's no criminal basis here. Mrs. Doyle, I can't arrest Mr. Hargrove." My heart pounded, then slowed into a long, heavy beat. Catherine froze. She screamed, "You're siding with him? Can't you see an entire community is being destroyed?" The deputy just shook his head, voice weary. "All I see is a community that built homes in someone else's lake. The law's not on your side." News spread fast. 2 days later, the local paper ran the headline, "127 Cabins Underwater Land Dispute Erupts at Lakeview Pines." TV crews came out, filming half-submerged cabins and furniture drifting in the water. Residents whispered, shook their heads, some even scoffed. They brought it on themselves. Insurance companies jumped in. After weeks of investigation, they issued a cold statement. "We deny all claims. This is a case of gross negligence, knowingly building in a long-documented flood zone." Just like that, the entire Timberline Cabins project collapsed into a mountain of debt. Investors pulled out. Families who bought cabins panicked and filed lawsuits. And in the middle of it all, Catherine Doyle lost everything. At an emergency HOA meeting, under the furious stares of dozens of residents, an older man stood and said loud and clear, "Mrs. Doyle deceived us. She ruined this community. I move for her immediate removal." The room erupted with applause and angry shouts. Catherine went pale, lips trembling, unable to speak. That night, her white SUV rolled out the gate of Lakeview Pines, and this time, it never came back. I stood on the lodge porch, watching her taillights vanish behind the hills. My chest tightened, not with joy, but with the heavy truth. Nature had done its work, but the price people paid was far too high. After Catherine left, Timberline Cabins looked more like a battlefield than a resort. I rode along the shoreline, peering through the broken windows of half-sunken cabins, where stagnant water sat inside like filthy tanks. The stench of rotting wood, mildew, and rust was so strong it made me wince. When I stepped onto the shore, I saw warped floors and walls streaked with mud. Some cabins were buried halfway in the lake, their shingles falling like loose teeth. Furniture, sofas, wooden tables, mattresses floated around like a massive pile of wreckage. They weren't luxury vacation homes anymore. They were shipwrecks stranded on land. I hired a demolition crew. They brought in bulldozers, chainsaws, dumpsters. It took nearly a year to clear out all 127 cabins, hauling away metal, wood, and concrete. Every day, I stood on the hill watching dust clouds rise, feeling both relief and a heavy weight. It was like I was erasing a chaotic chapter in this land's history with my own hands. While the crew worked, I reached out to a landscape architect who specialized in ecological restoration, Ellen Brooks. She was in her 60s, hair pure white, eyes bright and alive. The moment she stepped onto the scarred ground, she drew in a deep breath and said, "Mr. Hargrove, this land is exhausted. But don't worry, it'll come back if we give it the chance." Together, we replanted native trees, oaks, red maples, white pines. Along the shore, we sowed grass and planted reeds to hold the soil. Truckloads of fresh dirt filled the old concrete foundations. And when I saw the young saplings staked upright, something warm settled in my chest. 2 years later, the lakeshore looked almost unrecognizable. A young forest stretched tall, birds returned, and in the mornings, their songs carried across the valley. The water cleared, sunlight shimmering on the lake's surface. The scars of the cabins had vanished, replaced by a living green blanket. One afternoon, while I sat fishing in my boat, I spotted the Patterson family paddling by in a kayak. The husband raised a hand in greeting, his face shy but sincere. His wife gave a small nod. Their blonde-haired daughter, sitting between them, beamed and waved at me. In that moment, something stirred in my heart. I realized that even though they'd once been swept up in an illusion, they had learned the same lesson I had. Nature never loses to people. I drew in a deep breath, taking in the cool breeze and the faint scent of pine. I knew then that the fight was over, and the lake had finally been restored to what it was meant to be. When the last cabin was gone, when young trees began to rise on the scarred land, I sat once more on the porch of the old lodge, looking down at the lake shimmering in the afternoon sun. A calm washed over me, as if the land itself was breathing again after a nightmare. With a hot cup of coffee in hand, memories came flooding back, the roar of the iron wheel echoing through the dam tunnel, Catherine Doyle's furious screams, the desperate eyes of the Patterson family, and the silence of the lake as it swallowed each cabin. Every image played in slow motion, etched deep into my mind. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my father's voice again. "Son, this lake is a test. Will you protect it, or let it be taken?" My chest tightened, but not from fear this time, from knowing I had done exactly what generations before me had hoped for. I had protected the lake, not just with the law, but with the unwritten law of nature itself. The world outside might keep spinning faster and faster, new maps, contracts full of signatures, empty promises. But some truths can't be bent. Water always returns to where it belongs, and nature never bows to greed. In that moment, I realized people can build castles out of paperwork, but one gust of wind, one wave, is enough to sweep it all away. Only what's built on truth and respect for nature will last. One crisp autumn morning, as I pulled my boat down to the shore, a group of Lakeview Pines residents paddled past in canoes. They waved, their eyes no longer filled with pride or suspicion, but with quiet respect. I nodded back, my heart lighter. I didn't need their apologies. All I needed was for them to understand who truly belonged to this lake. And then everything fell into silence. Only the soft lap of water against the boat, the whisper of wind through young pines. I smiled, tilted my face to the golden sunlight, and a thought rose inside me, one I knew I'd carry for the rest of my life. I only had to turn the iron wheel once. Nature did the rest.